Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, colleagues, supporters of Severo Institute and our honorable guests, it's a great honor to welcome you all here to today's public debate, which is entitled European Imprint in Sahel, Contributing to Security and Stability in the Troubled Region. My name is Wojtek Billy. I'm a fellow researcher here at Prague Center for Middle East Relations at Severo Institute, who organizes this event, and it's a great honor for me to be your host tonight. Before we begin, just a little technical detail. For those who require translations, please pro češtinu prosíme nalaďte si kanál číslo 1 na vašich sluchátkách. For English, please, if you need a translation either from French or Czech, please tune the channel number 2. Et enfin pour français, si vous avez besoin de la traduction, soit d'anglais ou de tchèque, c'est le canal numéro 3 sur vos écouteurs. Merci. A very crucial point, this event is held under the patronage of His Excellency Jan Lipavsky, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, so for which we are extremely grateful because it's thanks to the ministry that this event can happen. A special thanks go to Tomáš Uličný and Nikola Adamcová from the Sahel, African Sahel Department, who actually enabled this event to happen at all. I would like to now welcome our honorable guests. On my right, I would like to welcome here Ms. Emanuela Claudia Del Rey, EU Special Representative for the Sahel. Emanuela Claudia Del Rey took up the duties of EU Special Representative for the Sahel on 1st July 2021. Her mandate is to lead the EU's contribution to regional and international efforts for lasting peace, security and development in the Sahel. She also coordinates the EU's comprehensive approach to the regional crisis on the basis of the EU strategy for security and development in the Sahel. Ms. Emanuela Claudia Del Rey is an Italian national with a long academic career, having conducted extensive research in conflict areas in the Middle East, Central Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. She was a member of the Italian Parliament and served as a Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy. Thank you for being here. Our second guest here is Dr. Jimmy Adoum, which is our High Representative of the Coalition for Sahel. He was appointed as a High Representative in February 2021 by the heads of state at the N'Djamena Summit. With his team from the Secretariat of the Coalition in Brussels, his mandate is to facilitate coordination and interaction between the different dimensions of international action in support of the G5 Sahel countries. An agronomist by training, with more than 25 years of professional experience in international development, Dr. Adoum has served as Chad's Minister of Agriculture and Technical Advisor to the President of the Republic. For 7 years, he headed the CILSS, the Permanent Interstate Committee for Drought Control in the Sahel, where he notably mobilized new partners such as World Bank, ADB, IDB, who have since invested heavily in pastoralism and irrigation, and US aid and EU contributions for strategies for resilience, food security, and adaptation to climate change. Again, thank you for being here. And lastly, our last guest is Mr. Abdoulaye Mar Diaye, which is a special coordinator for development in the Sahel of the MinSahel. He has served as the United Nations Assistant Secretary General and Special Advisor to the UNDP Administrator from 2019 to 2020. He was previously UNDP Assistant Administrator and Director for the UNDP Bureau for Policy and Program Support from 2018 to 2019. And as ASG and UNDP Assistant Administrator and Director of the Regional Bureau for Africa from 2013 to 2018. He also served as a Chief of Staff of the UNDP Administrator and Director of UNDP's Executive Office from 2009 to 2013. and as a Deputy Assistant Administrator and Deputy Regional Director of the UNDP Regional Bureau for Arab States from 2006 and to 2009. Prior to that, Mr. Diaz served as a Deputy Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for the United Nations operations in Côte d'Ivoire, as a UN Resident Coordinator, UN Designated Official for Security, Humanitarian Coordinator, and UNDP Resident Representative in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. I really hope I got it right. Prior to joining UN, Mr. Diaz held several senior positions within the government of Senegal as a Chief of the General Planning Division and Technical Inspector in the Ministry of Planning and Cooperation. He led the design of national development plans and international negotiations for development financing. Thank you all for being here. It's a tremendous pleasure for us all. Before we start the different presentations or interventions from my valuable guests, just maybe a few words about the topic of today. For those who follow our activities here at Severo Institute, notably in Prague Center of Middle East Relations, you have probably noticed that for the over past year, we are focusing more and more on African continent. And the reason is very simple. Sahel being the basically neighboring region of European Union brings multiple challenges that basically are relevant even to us and are becoming more relevant to years to come. Challenges such as difficult security situation regarding radical Islamic groups, issues related to migration, issues related to climate change, which causes the migration itself and other negative effects, and humanitarian crisis, or different political insurgencies and instability that has occurred in the past months and years. Sahel obviously is indeed a troubled region, as the title suggests. And for us as the Europeans, it is extremely important to hold this discussion, to think about, what the relationships of the European countries and the Sahel countries should look like. What is probably the best way how we could cooperate together in order to overcome certain difficulties. Still having in mind that obviously Europe is probably one of the closest partners to some of the Sahel regions, not only because of the historical relevance and common history, but also of the new era, because as you probably know, for many countries in Europe, Sahel is one of the priority regions in terms of the humanitarian missions, in terms of military missions, in terms of diplomatic missions. So I'm really excited today that we can actually have these experts on board that can share their insights, that can share their knowledge about these issues, and especially that you have the opportunity after their short interventions to ask questions and to have a real debate on these particular topics. So thank you again for you all to being here. And without further ado, I would like to give floor to Mrs. Emanuela Claudia Del Rey. Ms. Del Rey, the floor is yours for the next 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is a real pleasure for me to be here at the Severo Institute to talk about the European imprint in the Sahel. I want to thank, of course, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that has been hosting us for the last 2 days, and it is fundamental that we have this support from the Czech Republic, because the Czech Republic is really central in the Sahel, and this is the reason why we are having this kind of discussion, also to continue the great tradition of the Czech Republic in Africa in general. I have to say that the European Union in the Sahel is indispensable. I would like to say that it is the most important partner for the Sahel. Usually I say the natural partner of the countries of the Sahel. It applies an integrated approach, which is absolutely fundamental because it combines all the instruments and resources that the European Union has at its disposal. And I have to say that the resources are consistent and also our actions are very, very dynamic. In all the fields, from security to development to humanitarian assistance, our integrated approach is definitely something that is also, in a certain way, defining a framework which has been also inspiring a model, many other strategies that have been developed around the Sahel in the last 20 years. I have to tell you, this is very important that because we are now in a member state of the European Union, that the European Union action remains always subsidiary to the action of the member states. That means that we apply the European method in making choices. And this is fundamental because this means that when we take decisions, they are the result of a consensus that we reach among us. And it's not always easy to reach a consensus between 27 countries who have different perspectives according to their geographical position, interest, and of course also aspirations. Another aspect of our approach is related to the fact that we try to mobilize other international partners, and we want to act together in a group to make sure that we have the same logic and that we send a message that is in harmony with the positions of all the actors on field. I have to tell you also that the European Union is capable of becoming a multiplier of action at the service of the regional stability, meaning that because the European Union has a global role, and this is something on which we are reflecting very much now that unfortunately we are facing a very serious crisis at global level with the war in Ukraine, I think that this global role and the capability of being a multiplier of action should be really enhanced and maybe probably go through a more structural system. Many member states, as the Czech Republic, and that I've already mentioned, have decided to be involved in the Sahel for a number of reasons, because the Sahel is central for our interests and for our principles. Starting with our interest, I can say that there are a number of challenges, and I'm going very fast, of course, because I don't have much time, which are obviously reflecting the fact that whatever happens in the region has a direct impact on Europe, and not only, of course, but in terms of the impact on Europe is something that is really driving our actions in the region. I'm talking about the deterioration of the security situation in the Sahel, and the fact that also not only it is in the Sahel, but also there is a serious risk of contagion or spillover in the surrounding areas, which make the risk for us even higher. This is why we really need to intervene as much as possible to help the countries come out of their own internal crisis. Consider terrorism, but also criminal groups, different types of instability and insecurity issues. We have also to include the very unfortunate number of IDPs, internal displaced persons, and refugees, which amount now to about 2 million in the region only. Plus the food crisis. It's all connected, all interdependent, and this is why we really have to continue to be engaged in the region. Another very important aspect is the crisis of governance, which is for us central. It is the most important political message that the European Union has identified in its integrated strategy that has been defined in 2021. Governance is the key to everything. Because we usually talk about, the need to return to constitutional order after a coup d'etat. We talk about return of the state in areas which are very remote and are unfortunately subject to terrorism and criminal networks, and therefore they are not able to start their proper development or their proper control of the territory. It's not a mere formula to say so. It is really related to the fact that if we don't intervene, helping the countries to reconstruct their governance system, we will see other very vicious actors intervene, for instance, terrorist groups, by creating alternative systems of welfare, eluding the populations that they can be governed by this alternative system of welfare. And of course, this would create even more instability and impossibility for us to bring good practices, which we want to share, of course, with our partners of the Sahel. Another important aspect is the regional dimension. The regional dimension is in crisis as well, because we have a system based on the concept of G5, the great 5 countries of the Sahel. It's very difficult to keep all of them together for a number of reasons: coup d'etat, differences in perspective, approaches, governance, lacking of governance, or system of approaches to the different issues by which they are affected. But we have to keep this regional dimension, because it's fundamental. It also helps us to have a much more effective approach and much more effective operational intervention. The other aspect, again, I'm going very fast because we could speak for hours about these issues, is certainly communication. We have been repeating this in the last 2 days, in which we were meeting all together with all the special envoys for the Sahel of the different single countries. I represent 27 countries altogether, but there are many special envoys for many different countries that are very effective, and they also contribute to this very lively activity that we have in the region. And this aspect is communication, visibility, the fact that we need to counter the disinformation that is put in place by actors which are really vicious. They don't want any development. They don't want any kind of affirmation of proper models that can create a sustainable development. And I want to mention at the moment one, which is particularly important for us, which is Russia. And as I said repeatedly, if there is a country that knows what it means to be affected by the system of disinformation, which is a real warfare tool, is certainly the Czech Republic, because the Czech Republic has the experience of disinformation by Russia. Going towards the conclusion, I can say that, of course, at the moment, we are going through a very difficult period in history, and we know very well that what is happening now is going to lay the foundations for the future. We know that, for instance, Africa is looking at us to observing what we do. Of course, continuing to want to be to continue our partnership, but at the same time observing us. The president of Senegal, Macky Sall, in the recent UN General Assembly in New York, and also he repeated it in Dakar a few days ago, the forum of Dakar, in which I was also participating. He mentioned the fact that they don't want Africa to become the playground for the big powers to transform this in a Cold War. This is something that is also making an appeal to our responsibility. So what can I say in conclusion? First of all, I just want to reassure our friend that Africa sees an incredibly lively dynamic internal to its territory, and the Sahel as well. Consider that at the Dakar Forum, one of the most important invitees was the Foreign Affairs Minister of Saudi Arabia. because the interests of the Middle East in Africa are immense, and the only way by which we can take into account these dynamics is by creating alliances where it's possible, or at least make clear what are our principles, but considering that we cannot be in competition with anyone on the territory of the Sahel. So it's something that we have to build, because anyway, it's a very crowded area, the Sahel. It's not a real desert, it's very crowded. So we have to be careful. And in conclusion, I can say this, that I also said this morning. I think that it is very difficult to work in the Sahel. We are facing very difficult times, but at the same time, I think that what is at stake is the fact that we can, in the Sahel, because the Sahel is the most important dossier on the table of the European Union at the moment, in the Sahel we can really exploit an opportunity of positioning ourselves in the future world, which is being designed in these very days. And this is something that we have to take into account, because the new world order will see Africa as a protagonist. And we have been the most natural, most credible, and and oldest as well partner of the countries of the Sahel. We have this opportunity and we cannot waste it. It's also our responsibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Delray, EU Special Representative for the Sahel, for these opening remarks. Straight away, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Jimé Adoum, who will take a floor for the next 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Someone told me that when I said I'm going to Prague, they said that you should be on the street, walking and looking at buildings and so on, not inside. But we've been in here, not here, but over there for the last couple of days. But be assured that I'm finishing with this. I'm going to come back to Prague and spend 2 days out there just looking at the buildings. So I'll be true to form and be happily reporting back to folks who saying, yes, I was in Prague and I spent 2 days on the street. It's a magnificent city. Thank you very much for organizing this, and thanks my sister, the RSUA, for organizing the meeting of the Special Envoys, particularly as it relates, it adds up to the presidency of the Czech Republic and the focus naturally on the Sahel. And thanks to the Center for having us today this afternoon. So let me just first start by paying tribute to the European Union, the European presence in the Sahel. And actually, European member states and the EU are the bulk of the non-African partners of the coalition of the Sahel. For those of you who are not familiar with the coalition of the Sahel, it's about 60 states and institutions, plus a coordination of Sahel and civil society. The core is the Sahel states, the G5, the African countries, and organizations. Europe, and we cannot say it enough, Europe as states and commission of the European Union has been in the Sahel for decades. It has invested a lot of money in the nexus of security and development. After the collapse of Mali of 2012, it did even more and deployed many security missions, some of which were actually from the Czech Republic. It brings in the heavyweights for about 26 billion euro of the Sahel Alliance, supporting the people faced with the human insecurity and food security. But this has been the question of European footprints. To what extent can it be useful in the present and deteriorating context? Well, I'll put 4 key ideas where Europe in its plurality can make a difference. The first one is that Europe is key to reaching out to Burkina Faso and to bring it on, quote, good side, end of quote. As you know, Burkina has undergone 2 coups d'etat within less than a year. And when the second coup d'etat occurred, you have seen some kids waving flags of someone who shall remain anonymous. And so the issue is, wait a second, what's going on here? Is Burkina too is going to be sliding into areas where we don't necessarily think it's a good idea, like it's a neighboring country of Mali. And so the thing is, we need to really tighten up our belt and do what it takes, because you have displaced people, you have people with famine, you have people, kids, diploma without jobs, and so on and so forth. You have all the key ingredients in Burkina that, if we are not careful, could certainly make it a very tough place to be, and consequently alluding to the fact that Wagner is not too far away from that. And we need to avoid the domino effect. Number 2, Europe is key against the human security drama we face, not only in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in some of the areas in the regions. In the Western Sahel, the situation has deteriorated to the extent that we have about 4 million refugees and displaced people. Naturally, on top of that, you have a violation, a human violation, increased significantly either by terrorists or by defense forces, and human rights abuse have been fully documented by the representative of the U.S. Secretary General in Mali and some other areas, particularly in Mali, where Wagner is being deployed since 2021. So to address those issues, we just recently went to Dakar at the margin of the forum, and we organized a side event with the UN agencies, the ICRC, the Norwegian Refugee Council, on the 24th of October to mobilize. So basically mobilize, so we need to make some noise, and that noise certainly would be very helpful in crafting a strategy to help the Sahelian countries move away from the brinks of destabilization. Now here, the DG ECO was our stated relief in key. Likewise, the political pressure of the Europe states for the fight against impunity is key, and I'm confident that some proactive states will continue to raise the issue at the UN level, notably around Mali. We need to push for MINUSMA to be given unrestricted access to investigate human rights allegations and condemn human rights violation. We need to be clear that to call out Russia and Wagner's action, we should not shy away from holding government to account. That's key. It's not always Russia and the others, but government themselves need to be held accountable for the abuses they are portraying on their own population. And then we should not shy away in holding them accountable and supporting the end to deadly conflict against women, children, and their own people. 3, Europe, being mindful of Russia's strategy in the Sahel, can improve its communication strategies. We could not say enough of this because it's been discussed even within the framework of what the RSU organized with the special envoys, and it becomes a very preoccupying, thing, and we need to mobilize. We need to be able to come up with creative issues so that what do? You ask the questions, you do, but what about this communication? Constantly, the barrage of fake news that is seeping through, and then what, if anything, we need to do. So the academics and everybody should pull together so we can design effective strategies, how to deploy it, how to implement it out there, and we certainly, the coalition with its members and with the member states should be in a position to pull together and then put something worthwhile. Number 4, Europe is a key stakeholder for the structural issues. Security and development cannot be separated, as rightfully understood by the European strategy on the Sahel. It is about countering nutrition and at grassroots level, but also about working on climate change, boosting agricultural production of local community. Part of the answer continues to be with working with civil society, people who care about their own survival. Their only hope is for peace and stability. And we have experience with respect to looking at these issues with wide spectrum from security. In fact, if you look at the roadmap of the coalition, we have 4 pillars. We have a pillar 1, fight against terrorism, 2, reinforcing the defense and armed forces, pillar 3, provision of goods and services, the member state and their partners, and pillar number 4, that's where the development, long-term and sustainable development needs to be happening, because if you transform the production sectors, you create wealth and jobs, and that's how we're going to bring peace and stability into the region. Defense by itself is not going to make it. Development by itself is not going to make it. So we have to have a mix of tools and gadgets, and everybody deploying some smart intelligence, using science and technology to really get a good handle on this. So to conclude, Europe should show strategic patience, because it is tough. It really is tough. And I'm speaking from my standpoint of an African born, grew up and went all over the world and looked at a few systems, few models here and there. And then so we come back and say, okay, wait a second. We began talking about democracy back in 1990. Or, the African head of state looked around and said, well, okay, democracy, let's all dance to the tune of democracy. But then, of course, 20, 30 years later, you look at some of those countries, there is no democracy in such a way. Why? Because the population has not really been fully engaged in that, and to the extent that they are not engaged or they want to be engaged, then you have a ruthless dictatorship and bad governance and bad government, to making it really difficult to, for the population to blossom, to express their free will, to participate fully in educational opportunities. So we need to strengthen our partnership. We need to tighten up our belt. We need to say business as usual is no good. We need to think very creatively. And then the likes of ECOWAS and SILS and UOMOA and the likes of the UN system and what have you, all of us together and all of you together, we need to mobilize and put on the table something different, totally different. Based naturally on what goes on the ground, we can learn from that and then actually maximize it and then add to it the science and technology. We should be able to succeed. And we know, I'm not just sort of telling you the good things. We know for a fact that Europe is really a big engine. Europe has been a very, very good supporter of Africa, particularly the Sahelian region. And for that matter, it created the coalition with the presidents and the partnership. And 60 plus states and organizations are all in this coalition. Outside of the UN system, this is the largest gathering of people. And I think that it has a very dynamic and very democratic process that has gone on, validated the roadmap, and people truly begin to believe in this. And the time has come that we're going to shake it up a little bit more and then step up to the plate and put through selectively the key strategic issues that can be tackled with respect to gaining quickly short-term. In fact, immediately we need to come up with some lowest hanging fruit, and then we follow that with the short-term, the medium-term, and the long-term. And I think it's not always hopeless in the Sahel. There is hope. There is plenty of land, plenty of livestock, plenty of a lot of good things. So the war, unfortunately, what Putin is doing with respect to our neighbor, the Ukraine, has created a lot of difficulties, but opportunities as well. Those of you who are interested in investing in development out there, plenty of land, let's get busy, take advantage of that opportunity. And we are here to really be moving along with all of us together and step up to the plate and face those challenges, and we can do it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, Thank you very much, Dr. Jimmy Adoum, as a High Representative of the Coalition for the Sahel, for your opening remarks. Again, I would like to ask now Mr. Abdoulaye Dieye to present his own remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, MC, and greetings, friends. My drama is that the three of us have always been in the same platform making statements on the Sahel, and the drama is I always speak last. So you understand my drama. I face the risk of being redundant. So I have been so beaten by these two guys,
never be redundant.
And I refrain from making a statement because they would say whatever I wanted to say. So I just would like to comment or give a perspective on what they have said to add value, because their briefing is quite comprehensive. I would maybe give my perspective under 3 items. Item number 1 is to answer the question of this seminar. How do I see, not only as an actor in the Sahel, but as a Sahelian myself, the imprint of the AU in the Sahel? My second point is to challenge us collectively in this discussion. How can we further leverage that EU imprint to maybe move to what we could call a EU-Sahel Partnership 2.0? And last, I know that Emanuela and Adoum talked about it. I will comment on the geopolitics, the current geopolitics and the geoeconomy in the Sahel. Coming to the first point, the EU imprint in the Sahel. I mean, I can say and testify and explain how the imprint is very, very strong. First, in terms of investment, during the last 8-9 years, EU has been the lead investor in the Sahel to the tune of 1.1 billion a year. There is even the distant number 2 is very, very far from that investment. This is quite, in my view, impressive. Not only the lead investor in terms of development, but also the lead investor or supporter in humanitarian affairs. Number 2, the value of the EU is not only in the investment, it is a model of integration. I mean, this is the most, is the highest and most valuable integration model, and it is a reference to African countries and in the Sahel. I know that the AU and the ECOWAS try to model their integration after the EU, which is quite difficult, but at least we have an achieved model to follow. The third imprint which I see in the Sahel is, I don't know if I call it a kind of moral value or sentimental value. And Adoum, you said it, the EU and its manifestation has been in the Sahel, in Africa, in West Africa, since 1957, you know, when we had this ACP, Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific, and the EU relationship. And that is quite in the mind of the people. Lately, we have seen an AU-EU strong partnership. And let me bring a personal touch. Me and the cohort of young Sahelian who has been trained in Europe through EU scholarship. I remember I went to study in INSEE in France, the Institute of National Statistics and Economics, paid by the EU and the French government. And I went to do economic planning in the ISS, the Institute of Social Studies in The Hague, paid by the EU government. And we have many like that. And that stays in you, in your DNA, and makes you a kind of European, because they trained you, they made you what you are. And when I went to be director of planning and then moved to the UN, this is a debt that I owe to the EU, and this is a debt that many Sahelians owe to the EU. So in summary, if I would have to qualify that imprint, I would say that number 1, it has a high sentimental value. Number 2, there's a high capital of trust that the Sahelians have on the EU, and then there's a moral debt that we all have on the EU. So this is what makes the EU, in my mind, an entity with really deep impression on the Sahelian. Now, that's a capital you cannot lose. You have to leverage and then maybe move to a partnership 2.0. How do we do it? But your title say how do we address the trouble region? I mean, Emanuela and Adum talked about it. But I would like to challenge the title in a way. Adum did challenge it. It's not, you have two Sahels, the troubled one and the bright one. There are a lot, if you crisscross the Sahel, you see strong dynamics there. The youth, the woman, its rich economy, the opportunities, water, you know, etc. So this is a big business case. So it's not trouble. And I always worry, or maybe I'm not saying offended, that we are missing the value of the Sahel by presenting it only as a trouble region. It is a contrast that we have to look at. And then how do we, I always think that the trouble side can be beaten when we invest on the bright side. And this is the message I wanted to put forward, and I will be happy to discuss. Number one, youth dynamic. Number two, a lot of natural resources. Number three is a strategic positioning in the world between the north and the south, is a horizontal spine of Africa. This is important atu to build on. So how can we then leverage that positive imprint, and how can we leverage all the potential that exists in the Sahel for a 2.0 partnership? I think there are areas where EU beats everybody, that areas where bilateral partnership cannot go, and where the EU can go. We talked about it, Emanuela talked about it, even the MC talked about it. The area number one is the soft spot of governance. Whatever you do, if you don't deal with the governance rightly, all your investment will be, as economists will call it, a sunk cost. So I am glad that the new EU strategy is focusing on governance. And we are all there to support that one. There is a blind spot in the Sahel that we are not really dealing with, and I would submit that the EU can really invest there, is the areas of the borders and cross borders. It's where we have crisis. I remember, you know, if you have read that book, the book by Lao Tzu, the Book of Life and Virtue, where he said that don't neglect your borders. The war horses breed on the borders. All the trouble we have in the Sahel are coming from the borders, because, look, the Sahel is big. Take Mauritania, take Mali, take Nigeria, take Niger, take Burkina Faso. They are big territories. And you have government that are first captured by elite, but captured by the capital. So you have the borders and the cross-borders neglected. It's where the crisis is happening. Unless we deal with the borders and the cross-borders through good territorialization of public policies and support by partners like EU, we will not solve the crisis problem. So there is need to invest in the borders and cross-borders. For me, investing in the Sahel is good economics. A lot of potentials, but good economics doesn't sell in the market if you don't de-risk. Because the risk in the Sahel is extremely high, not only the real risk, but the perceived risk. So, and we're not investing on de-risking the policy environment and the investment environment in the Sahel. This is where I think we can make a dent by ensuring from good governance and ensuring that we have business practice right, so that we can help the Sahel. As I said, the Sahel is so big, I don't see countries getting out of the grooves of underdevelopment by themselves, unless they collectively work together through regional cooperation and regional integrations. There is a great tool that the EU has put forward, the Africa Free Trade Continental Area. For me, this is a support that the EU can do. Remember, I said that the EU integration model is a model that the Sahelian and African at large are looking after. That model could be replicated by supporting the Africa Free Trade Agreement. the Sahel is looked like a kind of island isolated in the world. There's a lot of potential to share. Unless first they share among themselves, it will be difficult for them to share with the others. Where also the EU can help the Sahel transform itself is on the value chains, ensuring that we have greater retention in the value chain. Look, when you look at all the commodities produced in the Sahel, internal value retention is only 5% of the chain, 5 to 10%. You cannot transform a country like that. We cannot have Sahelian or African just export raw materials. I know some countries are doing it. Unless you expand the value retention in the chain from 15% to 40 or 50%, we're at some cost. We're not investing in the Sahel. EU can help African countries better transform their products where they are. Of course, we talk about the nexus, which is a very difficult area to invest. But again, working with because EU invests, as I said, in development, in peace and security, and in humanitarian. So this is the cocktail of the nexus that we have also to apply when we invest in the Sahel. So I see value there. Let me conclude by talking about the geopolitics and the geoeconomics. Well, it's not magic or it's not random why there is a scrambling of investors or partners in the Sahel. I mean, you named Russia, but you have China, you have Turkey, you have the Arab state, and so on and so forth. Well, these guys are also seeing the potential of investing in the Sahel. So it's a pity to see the lead investor in terms of present or emotional value or trust of capital that EU has be lost there. I believe in the future of the Sahel, ensuring that the capital that EU put there as a seed, historically speaking, is leveraged up. So my final recommendation is to ensure that this partnership between the EU and the Sahel be elevated, but understanding that it is good economics, it is a business partnership, and that, for me, is the way forward. So I wanted to limit my introductory remark there, but I'll be happy to further develop when we discuss. Thank you, MC.
Thank you, Mr. Dier, for your opening remarks. Now, for the second part of this public debate, we really invite you to ask your questions to our honorable guests. Please feel free. My colleague here has a microphone, so whoever wishes to ask a question, now is your chance. Questions could be asked even in Czech for those who don't feel confident to speak in English or in French. Again, the translation is taken care of. But before I let you to ask your first question, I would actually steal the very first one for myself. Again, like all your contributions were tremendously interesting, but I would like to maybe take it a little bit back and like develop on what Mr. Dier just said. I'm quite intrigued by the idea about like the EU-Sahel partnership 0.2. And I understand your perspective that it's more about the business opportunities to be explored and the way it should move forward in that kind of a partnership. On the other hand, if we look at the current situation, particularly, let's say, in Mali or in Burkina Faso after a series of coups d'etat and, let's say, quite a challenging diplomatic turmoils which led to these countries, let's say Mali, to turn to, let's say, new partners for European Union, quite problematic partners, notably Russia. If you look at the way how, let's say, the very old partnerships between European countries and these regions and countries in Sahel has been challenged or broken, even, let's say, if I put it a little bit dramatically. Could we actually imagine at this very point to move to something that complex, such as this very close business partnership with a lot of investing opportunities, while there's like fundamental issues on the diplomatic level and like some, let's say, broken ties, which probably will take some time to heal. On second second level, let's say second sub-question, is that the current development in Sahel sometimes is described by some people as a moment where, like, the very established institution, including the Sahel Coalition or ECOWAS, are being, let's say, questioned or threatened because they might become in the future less relevant. Again, I'm not stating this as my opinion. It's more about, like, the debate that has been taking place at the moment. Where do you actually see? And this is a question for everyone who would like to follow up on that. Where do you actually see the potential here? What needs to change in order to get to that, let's say, EU-Sahel Partnership 0.2? Because I'm not quite sure if it's that easy, let's say. So if there's anyone who would like to make a comment on that or, like, respond to that question, I'll be very, very pleased.
All right, I'm going to start, and then I'll leave it to to her or to him. Let's talk about Mali. Mali had a coup d'etat that threw out former and late President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. Why? Because the malgovernance is so rampant. And listen, folks, for the longest period of time, the international community looked the other way around. In other words, the country was rotten to the core. And I'll make these statements anywhere and inside Mali. Malians themselves have had enough, got organized, the army got in, they threw out the president. Bandao was designated a prime minister, a president, a prime minister, and then a few military ran the country. Then, naturally, the envy to occupy the center stage kicked in, and when Bandao made a few changes, Goïta and company said, no, this direction is no good. So they overthrew Bandao, and Goïta himself decided, okay, I'm going to just be pretty sitting in that presidential chair. So the international community, including ECOWAS, got busy, applied a lot of pressure on Mali. It took a long time before they finally agreed on a framework with respect to the length of the transition and return to the constitutionality. That's act number one. Act number two, when you have everybody on you because you did bad behavior, then you needed a support jacket, a life jacket, then you sort of squabbled a little bit, and then you say, okay, the international community, ECOWAS, everybody else is breathing too deeply on their necks. Then you need as they call it in French, une soupape. So along comes Russia and company, and they said, oh, by the way, if you are put under severe pressure, we're going to be able to help you do something better. We're going to relieve some pressure off of you. All of a sudden, and listen carefully, all of a sudden, for over 10-year engagement from the international community, 59 soldiers from France died, African soldiers dropping dead left and right and so on. And all that investment was just packaged, put in a bottle, and then thrown away because the Putin and company said, don't worry about them, we're going to come and help you out. Finally, they agreed with the ECOWAS to find a suitable timeline. Instead of 5 years, they said, okay, 24 months. So progressively, between then and now, things just did not work well in Mali. The armed forces, I mean, the Czech are here to witness, the Germans, the French, everybody say, it was so untenable, even MINUSMA is having tough times. So people packed and moved away because it's really difficult to cohabit or coexist with Wagner. The international community puts in resources, money, and lives. Wagner comes in and puts their hands in your coffer to help themselves. In summary, it was out of control. Nothing could be done. Malians go to United Nations and insult everybody and so on and so forth. Finally, people resorted to what? Simple things. Wait until the transitional government or the transition period ends. Meanwhile, you can stay engaged with the population because you can't just walk away from the population and let it up for the dogs with respect to food security and so on and so forth. People are still in there doing things. But when it comes to governance, this governance is just completely out of control, and people could not wait enough to be able to get this transition period finished, and then Mali coming back to constitutional order, and then business certainly will pick up because Mali has a lot of good stuff, a lot of opportunities. That's what I'm going to leave it for now, and I'll let the other two experts appreciate it. Thank you.
I think you did great. There are lessons to be learned out of that experience. When we need to speak up, we have to speak up. When we need to act up, we have to act up. We, the UN and the EU, we stand for values, and when we see that values are not respected, we should speak up. Otherwise, the people, they associate us with the deviations that they see. And you're right, during Ibeka tenure, there was a lot of corruption in Mali, and we knew that Mali was going straight to the wall, and we didn't speak up loud. And that's why when trouble came, population associated us with the trouble. The lesson is that we have to speak up. In many, again, back to governance, in many countries we see deviation from standard norms of governance, and then we don't speak up. We continue supporting them. Of course, they associate us with trouble when it comes. So I think we have to speak up. Like when leaders try to stay beyond the constitutional terms and so on and so forth. Look what happened in Guinea. We knew trouble would come. Even in Côte d'Ivoire, we have to speak up so that we keep nurturing the trust the people has in us. So our duty to speak up, our duty to act. I think ECOWAS, I wouldn't say failure, but shortcoming is that they didn't activate that a standby force to support Mali. When there's this crisis, everybody has to act. And the trouble of ECOWAS is that that standby force was not activated, is not activated. I think we have to honestly accept that. But coming to your question, I think that the ties are broken forever between Mali and France. We all travel into the Sahel, and that sentimental tie is still there. The crystal is not broken, but the ties have been a little bit stretched. Deep inside the Malian people, deep inside the French people, I think maybe reconciliation is not the term, reconnection will happen. You cannot throw it out in the window what you have built for centuries and centuries. That's my deep conviction. And whenever I travel there, I have that feeling from the people that this is just a nightmare that we're going through, but reality will prevail. We have seen worse situations, and we came over it.
I can only say that talking about this partnership 2.0, that I think maybe the Africans are ready, but I'm not sure the Europeans are ready, in the sense that we are still trying to digest the concept of partnership with Africans, which for us was, as I usually say, a true cultural revolution. And I think that we are still digesting it, and we are still trying to find ways of implementing this concept of partnership. It's not very easy for a number of reasons, also because there are several impediments on the part of the Africans, of course. Every time we start a process, then we have a coup d'etat. Certainly this obliges us to restart again. But in terms of our own approach, I think that while the Africans are not anymore the Africans of 10 years ago, everything has changed. We have a new generation of leaders. We have new generations of representatives of civil society, of activists, the youth in general, students, people who ask for a better life on the model of the European Union, but still they are new and they want an acceleration of history. The Europeans are still the same they were 10 years ago, although of course many things happen, but in general the philosophical body is still there and has not changed radically as it has in Africa, according to my analysis and my knowledge of the region. So Partnership 2.0, good, it's a very good idea, but we have to start working on the Europeans first, and then work to make the partnership really effective, really a partnership on an equal basis, and from there on maybe we can start thinking about 2.0.
Thank you all for your insights and thoughts, and especially a reaction to my question. I'm not going to steal more of your time. Please feel free, if you have any questions, my colleague here is with the microphone. Yes, please.
Could you please state your name and then the question?
Hello, my name is Juan Francisco. I'm a masterand in Charles University. Masterand. Speak up. Yeah, like this. I'm a masterand in geopolitics, and I have two questions, which are engaged in the support for the missions for both sides, one from the Sahel and one from Europe. The first one would be, you've all mentioned that there's crisis of governance, that there's other groups that have power within these countries. So how do these missions, how do these partnership looks like? Does it look more engaging with civil society? Does it look more, even if the knowledge that we're getting from the civil society goes against what the government of the country in particular may be saying? So how those missions work? And the second one would be on the European part. Ms. Leray, you've been saying that we have to work on Europe first in that sense. Precisely because of COVID and then with Ukraine, with the invasion, there's been several countries that have already said that they're reducing their budget or that they don't want to increment their budget. How is the EU mission in the Sahel working to try to get those funds on? Because as like important examples as Germany, for example, is also not that, doesn't seem to be that willing of putting money or putting more effort in the region. Thank you.
Maybe Mr. Dier, if you would like to react to the first question, or is it?
Maybe more than one.
Okay, we heard the first question, how these missions work regarding the governance. Maybe if you could specify a little bit.
Yes, I mean, basically what we are seeing is that there's coups in the Sahel, no? And there's several coups. And then our institutions cannot really work beyond the state institutions of those states. Because to develop any mission, you need an international mission, you need to have the acceptance of the state to allow you to enter and do this. So how are we working, how are these missions working more with the civil society, more getting that information of what does the civil society want?
This is an excellent question from a student doing geopolitics, and you're right. And it is my view that the generation of the UN missions have reached their limit. And I always recommend that we go to generation number 3. The first generation was elaborated as a student of geopolitics. I'm sure you have read, if not you must read, the work by Brahimi, who advised the UN to design what we call the Brahimi generation of peacekeeping missions, where you integrate humanitarian development. Everything is integrated. In the past, you will have for the UN, you would have the UN country teams that deal with development completely disconnected with the political missions. And Brahimi recommended a kind of integrations. In 2006, 7, 8, the head of DPKO, the peacekeeping operation at that time, Jean-Marc Guéhenno came with the second generation of peacekeeping based on trust and acceptance of the people before we get into a mission. I believe, and we are seeing the limits in Mali. There is no trust there, not of the fault of the mission, but where I would recommend a third generation of peacekeeping mission based on the usual stuff, protection of civilians and so on and so forth. But I think the third generation of mission has to deal with rebuilding the social contracts in those which are broken in most of these countries. Broken in the vertical axis between the state and the people and the citizen, and broken in the horizontal axis of the social contract between communities. That we didn't pay attention. In the Sahel, you are familiar of this tension between herders and farmers. We are lost in addressing that. May I think that the new generation of UN mission should address the social contract. It's because the social contract is broken vertically and horizontally that you have all these crises. I always said that La Grande Armée, the greatest army in the fight of terrorism, is not the military, it's the social contract. I always cite and I admire the model of Costa Rica. They don't have an army, they have police, but the social contract is so strong that it's difficult to get a dent into it. So in Africa, we have to strengthen the social contract, which is extremely important. Now, it's not easy because the EU, as the UN, we are intergovernmental. But I challenged the UN Secretary General, and I told him that if you want to make a dent in history, you have to write Chapter 20 of the Charter of the United Nations. Chapter 1 starts with we the people. Chapter 19 ends with 111 articles, we the government. Something is wrong. We started with the people and we ended by with the government. Chapter 20 should be back to we the people. And this is where the UN could invent a model of people's agency. We shouldn't be prison of government because government doesn't necessarily reflect the people. I know it's not easy, but we have to use creativity to go to the people. If we don't do it, well, something is missing. And then, the chapter of the United Nations is suspended on gravity. So there's work to do. I hope that as a student of geopolitics, you can enlighten us to write that chapter number 20. Over to you.
I'd say a couple of things and then RSU can comment. The UN missions don't work. Let's just stop, period. Let me do this. For over 30 years ago, in Republic du Congo, Kinshasa, God only knows how much money has been invested. And as we speak, the M23 is trying to battle Kabila and, Tshisekedi and company out of town. The Mali is this recent. And so if you look at the model, you sent about 3,000 people who are supposed to be looking out for troubles, and then you have 5,000 people protecting those who are looking out there to see what's happening. It doesn't work that way. So if I can take that and link it to the social contract, it's governance, period. Yeah. Governance, because if the people have a government that responds to their needs, c'est quoi? You look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and neither one is being satisfied to the extent that when people are left with holding empty bags and the thugs running government and so on and so forth, the R+1, +2, +3, we will not move away from displeasure, we will not move away from havoc. So 30 years of experience over there have not resulted much of anything. And what we experience here in Mali is nothing different than what we have experienced in Kinshasa. And there are some other hot spots that have not resulted much of anything. So let's go back to good governance. If we get back to good governance and the judicial use of the resources, and all of us who have something to do with that, we sit down and talking about civil society, bringing people along, designing systems whereby checks and balances and mutual accountability become the rule of law, we are more than likely to make some dent into malgovernance, poverty, and create a lot of opportunities. Anything short of that, we're not going to do anything different than what we've been seeing, and I think we are in it for a long, long haul. Thanks.
Well, I would like to make an appeal to complexity, which is something that I repeat often in the last year, because I think that the Sahel suffers from oversimplification. And this is to answer your question, meaning when you are talking about missions and interventions and models, actually they're very complex. For instance, when we talk about governance, we don't have one specific idea because we have to contextualize. And also we have proposals that come from the countries themselves, from the populations. We were talking about transborder communities, but for instance, just to mention, decentralization at the moment is one of the most discussed issues because of the vastity of the territories and the need to have local authorities which refer to the state, but at the same time they have their own power to intervene in local problems. So complexity, I think, is the key word to approach this kind of issues. And also I want to say that in terms of what is happening in certain countries regarding our missions, the European Union missions. Of course, we have been applying models that have been working until a certain moment. For instance, you take UTM, the European Union Training Mission. We have trained 18,000 soldiers in the last few years, which means that we have been doing a great job in cooperation with the state, in Mali, for instance. But at the same time, unfortunately, as we know, there are, in the causal model, there has been an intervening variable, which is the coup d'etat, the first one and the second one, which have changed completely the scenario, and especially the intervening variable of Wagner. The Wagner group, which is the group of Russian mercenaries, for those who don't know, which has been considered by us, for a number of reasons that I'm not going to discuss now in depth, by us, the European Union, as a red line, because we could not accept, of course, to train soldiers that after they finish our training would go and work under the command of a mercenary group. So you see that there are various issues. Of course, in principle, the way we structure the missions is decided together with the state and defined in a way by which we obtain the maximum result. But there are a number of impediments which are very serious in this moment that unfortunately have changed the scenario completely. One word about our budget, for instance. I have to say that this is a very frequent question that all my African friends ask me. For instance, have we changed our budget after the start of the war in Ukraine? Are we reducing our investment, the European Union, in Africa because of the war in Ukraine? Luckily enough, I can answer that we didn't change the budget. We have not changed it, which is a very important political statement. Consider that all these things are the result of incredibly complex negotiations, also within the European Union itself, because we are 27, so we have to discuss each issue. Therefore, I think that in this moment, this is one thing on our side that we can, of course, use to demonstrate that we are still the most credible and the natural partner of the countries of the Sahel. Of course, if we go into the perception of the African countries towards the actions of the European Union at the moment, the discussion becomes very lively, and there are many other elements that we would have to add. Thank you very much for the question.
I believe there was a gentleman who wants to ask a question. Please.
I did have a question. My name is Tobias Hansen. Thanks for the panel and thanks for letting me ask my questions. Actually, it's one and a remark. The question refers to you, Emanuela Del Rey, and that is taking up your thoughts on the Partnership 2.0. How would you even envisage to educate such an old continent as is Europe to move quicker towards those Africans that have matured? And that makes me think of maybe business is not the key point to interconnection, but civil societies, so European and Sahelian, because I think on that level we are pretty low interconnected. And my remark refers to the title of the panel. Why did you choose to ask for the European imprint and not the EU imprint, as Mr. DA was quite aptly showing that it's the, from my perspective, what I've understood, the EU imprint you're discussing, and European sounds rather historic to me. Thank you.
Let's take one more question, and after that we will have your comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Luca Ferrini, researcher. I'm interested in hearing the panelists' opinion about potentially moving to negotiations with the rebel groups, so supporting the governments, particularly of Mali and Niger, to enter structured, whether public or non-public negotiations with the groups, which apparently are already happening. Does governance and the approach of governance include inside mentoring, support, structuring of such negotiations for local peace in the villages and in the regions to then bring peace from the bottom up? Thank you.
Okay, I have been asked to answer the question. Partnership 2.0. I have my ideas. Where is the, okay, over there. No, I have my ideas, of course, and my idea is that there are several problems. One problem is time, because, for instance, to accelerate our actions as European Union, we need to accelerate bureaucracy. And we cannot renounce to bureaucracy. You know that by many sociologists, starting from Weber, it has been defined as a golden cage, in the sense that on one hand it helps you to be equal, on the other hand, of course, it is something on which you have to work closely to make sure that all the rules are respected. This means that, of course, all our procedures are very slow for obvious reasons. And this is something that is difficult when you talk to the Africans or you work with the Africans, because the need is so urgent that unfortunately for the moment we are successful in intervening in emergencies. Very difficult for us to start working more on the structures and the development because of this slowness. The other element is the fact that, yes, we should educate the Europeans. I always say that, unfortunately, the Africans are excluded from the global debate, which is really absurd in this world. And this means that we have to allow more spaces, so it's a question of time and space, more spaces for the Africans to be present in our local, national, global debate. And this is also related to the fact that we have a problem with leaders. I have started since a long time ago, even when I was vice minister and, you know, as a politician, as an academician, I have started repeating continuously that unless we include the African leaders in our decisional processes, we are not going anywhere. And this is something that is far from coming for a number of reasons, and we know that in the Sahel it's very difficult because, of course, of the different political situations that are very complex. Regarding negotiations with rebel groups, there are countries that have been successful in this. Mauritania, I think it's an interesting model to study. Others, I don't know. It depends on the various local situations, which, as I said before, are very complex. And be careful not to end up by making, let's say, a sort of equally represented system that is applicable to all the countries, because it's not so. It's not applicable to all the countries and not even applicable to all the regions and areas in the single country. So you can imagine how complex it is. But Mauritania, it's an interesting case study if you want to go into this particular topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On the first question, I'm not despairing. I really think that the EU gateway is a way of bridging the new generation with the focus on digital platforms, because the new generation is digital, and that is something that I would like to encourage. I really salute, coming from Senegal, the EU representative that just left. She really was creative. We always, in our discussion, we said that you have to work with context and with creativity. And she managed to engage with the young generation, the young people in the suburbs of Dakar, Senegal. And she really realized a lot. And she set the bar extremely high. With creativity, you can do a lot of stuff. It's true that our systems are very rigid, but if you work with context and creativity, giving primacy to the proximity, you can find solution. And she made the dent. Now, on the question of talking to the rebels, I don't know if the word is negotiations, but dialogue should continue. I am a believer that you should never stop talking. There's always the right actors to talk. You have the community leaders, the religious leaders, the Saint Egidio types. We must never let the bridge between fighting partners stop. That's the moment you don't speak, the gap widens. You always find way. They always find way to dialogue. I'm not saying negotiation per se, but at least discuss. It's in the dialogue that you will find solution. You always dialogue with your enemies anyway. If you stay there, the gap will be wider. So I really would like to strengthen this kind of dialogue. Sometimes we use the concept of humanitarian diplomacy, or religious diplomacy, or community leaders diplomacy. But for me, this is to be encouraged until you find the moment now to dialogue for solution forward. But never stop the bridge of communicating with the actors.
Just add a couple of things to what my colleague said. Actually, in the woods, people moved slightly further into this model, i.e. people talk, people negotiate. What is of critical significance is that once you get them out of the woods, you need to prepare them to disarm and develop and reinsert them into active human activities. So Niger has she talked about Mauritania, a beautiful case. Niger, which is struggling a little bit, began that, and I just talked to Abu Tarka maybe about a month ago, the guy who's in charge of this whole scheme. So we need to the extent that there are some hopes in the negotiation, we need to really make sure that bring assistance or help to the government who took this step to talk with the fighters or the terrorists and what have you, so when they come back in, they are going to be fully engaged, occupied with some meaningful activities rather than becoming frustrated and resorting back to circling back into the woods again. So that's where actually some of the debates is taking place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, regarding the time, I think we have a time for only a last round of 1 or 2 questions, so feel free to ask. Okay, perfect.
Well, if there is no question, I will actually have one. Among the actors that are also present in Sahel, quite active, you mentioned China, you mentioned Turkey. And my question is, how about Turkey? Is Turkey going on its own, or is Turkey also engaged within the EU processes and EU efforts there? Or is it just their game they are playing without coordinating or considering the European or European Union efforts there?
Well, I start with China. China, according to many appeals that are made to us from various actors, because you have to consider you have the actors in Maghreb, you have the countries of the Gulf of Guinea. It's a really very lively situation. Well, China is becoming a bit imposing because they are also using a system of disinformation at the moment. So unfortunately, these are the news, and therefore we have been coexisting with China so far, but it's very difficult. We have to anticipate the future and see in what way we want to build our relationship with China, because China is very present since decades and will be even more present in the future, and we probably will have to find some sort of understanding, mutual understanding. Regarding Turkey, Turkey is also very present. They know exactly what they are doing. They are members of NATO. I personally, this is a very personal opinion, I think that also with Turkey we will have to have start a dialogue to see where they are going and what kind of future we can expect. Being active on the same territory. So this is my answer for the moment.
Thank you very much.
That question is a big question. It goes beyond Turkey and China. I don't know if you know, but the UN Secretary General and the Chairman of the African Union have asked former President of Niger, President Issoufou, to reflect on the Sahel, do a kind of strategic assessment of all the interventions, and then give us a guidance forward. And we are all working with him, and myself and all of us. And one recommendation, and I think it's a timely exercise, one recommendation I put forward to President Issoufou is that it will be important. You have so many actors in the Sahel. It would be important that we agree on a kind of Sahel consensus. What are the big 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 areas where we should all converge to help the Sahel tilt forward? And that consensus would be a kind of compass to rationalize our various interventions. And the second recommendation I gave him is that if not only design that consensus, Sahel consensus, but a kind of code of conduct maybe not to tame actors, but to ensure that a code of conduct with principles, so that our scrambling or fighting on the Sahel is done along principles that we all agree, so that we minimize the high entropy we're seeing in the Sahel. Now we have a high entropy. I pity the poor Sahelian countries. They can't handle this geopolitical positioning in the country. They are tiny, and the regional entities are not strong. ECOWAS is not strong enough to support them. So the second best way of doing it to have that consensus and the code of conduct. That will minimize the entropy that these poor Sahelian countries are facing, in my view. It's a personal perspective that I wanted to share.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Adem, would you like to add something to that? Or?
Well, the thing is, China and Turkey are business people for the longest period of time. China comes in and dumps a lot of no so good stuff, bad stuff, sometimes okay stuff, but it lends money to thugs. And then they use that money, and progressively China holds you by the neck because the amount of debt becomes so insupportable. They said, oh, by the way, if you can't pay back, it's okay, we can manage the port and so on and so forth. And you're looking at 100 years of indebtedness and so on and so forth. But Turkey, for the time being, Turkey gives a little bit of money, but it's also into business, construction. For instance, Turkey, in Niger, the airport, they constructed and then they manage it so they can recuperate their money, Radisson Blue and so on. So you see all kind of models going in, competing in our space, and yet, as he said, maybe what we should do is say, oh, hola, stop all of this. So maybe the opportunity provided by President Issoufou and his framework should give us time to sit down and reflect and then, pour it in concrete terms and say, by golly, between now and then, from now on, this is the rule of the game by which all of us need to be playing. Unfortunately, you give us free money, and then so somehow you look around when the bad governance is happening. You too need to step up to the plate and cannot put up with bad governance. You have to say bad governance is bad governance. That's the only way we're going to break free from this enslavement. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you all. Thank you for your contributions. Unfortunately, our time is up. So please allow me, I would like to once again thank all our honorable guests. Thank you so much for taking your time to share your expertise, your thoughts on these, let's say, interesting topics. We are extremely keen to do that because, let's say, it's part of our mission of, let's say, public awareness of these key issues which are not often that medialized or not often that discussed in the public debate. That's why it's that important for institutions such as Severo Institute to bring this up to the light. So thank you so much for that. Again, thank you, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, again, for cooperating with us and co-organizing this event. And for your participation, we hope to see you soon on the next events organized by Severo and partner institutions. Thank you so much.